Welcome back to another episode of the Styleframe Saturdays podcast. I'm your host, Caroline Lee. It's a new year, it's a new season, and I've got some special guests helping me kick it off today. Today, joining me is a fantastic group from the Gunner School: Yhareli Unger, Jeffery Lawson, Yhareli Miller, Doyoung Kwon, and Matthew Sorgie. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, thanks for
having us. Thank you so much for having us. Great.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's my pleasure. Well, so before we dive into the details of the show today, I have to acknowledge one person here who's more or less made this happen, Mr. Jeff Lawson. Jeff and I, catch up throughout the years, over the years. And recently when we caught up, he said to me, he's like, hey, I'm over at Gunner now. And I think I got like an idea that I'd love to share with you for the show. He's always shown a genuine interest in the podcast. And so we got to chatting. And well, here we are. I mean, this was the idea for today. So, thanks to him for bringing us all together. So thank you, Jeff. Claps for Jeff.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks,
Jeffrey.
Now, I know we've got a great project to get to with you guys, but, I'd love to learn more about you all individually and the Gunner School first. So Amy, actually, if you wouldn't mind starting things off, could you briefly tell us how you got into the field of motion design and, what the Gunner School is all about, as well as your role there?
Yeah, so I'm Amy. I'm the executive director at Gunner School. I got into motion design somewhere around 2014, roughly. I actually went to school at Macomb Community College, which is a local college here in the Metro Detroit area. I have my degree in 3D animation. At the time, there was no motion design program. Motion design was still kind of forming as an industry at that time period. And I had a couple of really great mentors when I was in school that just pushed us towards motion design. Myself and a few others who later formed Boxfort. And then, we were always in close proximity to Gunner when it was a studio. Literally, physically close proximity. We were in a school building for a little while here in Detroit, and Boxfort was downstairs, Gunner was upstairs. So we would always run into each other and see each other, and people would freelance with them. And then later on, Gunner was acquired by Duolingo. So during all of this, I was working for School of Motion. I worked there for several years, working on training programs, helping all the instructors make the amazing courses that School of Motion has today. I forgot the total, but I worked on basically everything from animation boot camp to demo reel dash. That's my timeline for being there. But after I left School of Motion, this opportunity opened up for Gunner School. We all saw the news where Gunner had been acquired by Duolingo. We were like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And then we saw, they're going to build a school afterwards. And I just kind of raised my hand and I was like, hey guys, I'm free to do stuff. So I was originally brought on as the curriculum director to build this program. And now I'm the executive director and I just wear all of the hats, plus, the wonderful people that I have on the board, like Jeffrey Hung from Bien and several others who have pitched in to help out and continue to build the school going forward.
That's awesome. No, that's really cool. Wow. I mean, my gosh, you've already done so much in such a short period of time. So
yeah, it's hard to pack it down to all right, let's get this under 2 minutes.
Yeah. No. Very, a very long resume there. So, well, Jeff, same questions for you. How did you sort of get into the industry and, what's your role? Amy sort of alluded to it, but what's your role currently at Gunner School?
So I got into the industry about 2019. That's when I graduated from SCAD. Did a few internships, newfangled, then transitioned over to an apparel kind of an animation role. And then shortly, about a year later, I transitioned to art director role at Demo Duck. And then when, things kind of went downhill as far as the economy, I took some time to go freelance. And so shortly after, I became a student of Gunner School. And then after that, a few years later, I became a mentor with Gunner, and then shortly transitioned into a board member role. And so, now that I'm in this role of mentoring and helping the students, it's kind of where I've landed. And, my role there is to coordinate and help facilitate awesome events like this, or, fireside chats, or mentoring sessions, and stuff of that nature.
Very cool. Yeah, no, I've firsthand been able to witness some of the, events you guys are, advocating and pulling together. I was able to be a part of one of the fireside chats. And yeah, no, I mean, it's the format, all the stuff that you guys are putting into the school is really great. And I love to see that, there's a lot of behind the scenes sort of, building up on like real world experiences and stuff like that. I'm not sure if there, maybe it does exist, elsewhere in the industry, but, at least for me firsthand seeing that, I was just like, this is awesome. This is really great experience for anyone coming in and out of the program. So that's awesome. Really, yeah, no. And again, kudos to you for making this happen today. So, really working on sort of like, getting the Gunner name and, the program out there for us. Well, so now to the amazing students who've gone through the program. Doyoung, could you tell us briefly how you got into motion design and what led you to join the Gunner School program?
Oh, actually, I'm a big fan of Gunner School. So when I started the motion graphic design almost since the 2017 in South Korea. Yeah, so when I started, I really liked watching the motion graphic video from the Gunner School, Gunner Studio. So I really imagine about to join that space. So yeah, I'm apply that and coming here.
That's amazing. Wow. Like literally went from I'm a fan to now I'm a part of it. So couldn't be more direct than that. No, that's wonderful. Yhareli, why don't you go next? Same questions for you. How did you sort of get into the field of motion design and what led you to Gunner School as well?
Sure. So my background is in graphic design and product design, specifically UI UX. And I never thought I would be doing motion as a career. So in 2017, after I finished grad school, I was hired by this company in Indianapolis, Indiana. We specialize in product design and go to market. So the first 3 years, I was doing more of the UX design work, but it became apparent that wasn't really my fit. And the executive team was so gracious to give me the opportunity to switch over to the brand team. And the brand lead at that time knew that I had an interest in motion design because even in college, I had just admired different studios and looked at their work, but never really did anything with it, never really thought I could do that. So I would watch tutorials here and there, but it was nothing serious. So when he found out that I had that interest, he was like, yeah, she can be on my team. I want her to focus on motion and see how she can apply it to brand design work that we do, and then eventually even product stuff that we were doing. So I've been at the company now for 9 years, and the last 6 years, I've been able to just simply figure out how to make motion a part of our offering, one of our services. A lot of trial and error, but yeah, it was through work and having this pivot moment where I was like, UX is not for me. I want to do something different. I was able to find my lane. So yeah, since 2020, I've been able to really learn a lot. And because I'm the only motion designer, I've had to just seek out a lot of information, advice outside of work. And that's how I met Jeffrey at a conference back in, I believe, 2022. And I think you mentioned that by then you had done Gunner School, or maybe the following year you did Gunner School. And that's how I was introduced to it as well. I'm like, that's really cool. I think at that time, Gunner School wasn't offering the online version. So it was hard for me to consider applying. But then when I did find out that they had an online cohort, I'm like, why not? Let's give it a shot. And thankfully I got in and learned a lot. So
yeah, no, that's amazing. Hey, that's the beauty of the internet nowadays, right? I mean, you can find almost any piece of information that you need on there. And then there's these great opportunities like, the online schooling system where you can really just, get your hands dirty, dive in. And, also amazing to hear that, you're sort of like, I have an interest in motion design. They really kind of like created that role for you, and you've been learning so much ever since then. So yeah, great. Good on you for sort of like pioneering the way where you're at currently.
Yeah, trying to.
Well, and last but not least, Matthew, why don't you tell us your story and how you got into the field and what brought you to Gunner as well?
Sure, thanks. So I'm pretty fresh into the motion design industry. I graduated high school in 2020. And up until then, I was just doing art all of my life, mostly illustration work. And this was the height of the pandemic. So I ended up taking a gap year to sort of pursue that full time, which was an incredible experience. But I was really craving a medium that was better suited for storytelling and collaboration. And so that sort of sparked an interest in what a career in animation could look like. And so I found my way to USC, where I studied animation and digital arts at the film school there. And really quickly into my time there is when I started being introduced to more motion graphic studios. And Gunner was sort of the first one that really jumped out at me for its style. And I was like, oh, it would be so cool to work for a studio like this and create this type of work in the future. So that was sort of my North Star in undergrad. And then when I heard of the news of Gunner being acquired, I became even more interested in the school and potentially being a part of that. So there was one summer session that I applied to, didn't get into that one. And then I applied again after I finished my degree this past May, and it worked out. So I came to Detroit to do the program and met all of these wonderful people. And it was a really great experience. And since then, I've just been working freelance as a motion designer, illustrator.
Very nice. Yeah. Jumping right in. Yeah. Congrats on your recent graduation. And then
thanks.
Just immediately diving into the world of motion design. That's fantastic. Well,
Yeah,
Amy, it's kind of
thanks.
sounding like, you guys have cultivated quite the fan base that have then just brought all these people over to you guys to even learn even more about the industry and really dive in, getting hands dirty, learning more about the industry. So yeah, no, what a wonderful opportunity that you guys have all experienced. Um, you know, I sort of, did the traditional schooling, like you were just saying, Matthew, where you went to college, learned the tools of the trade, and then kind of dive right in and everything. I don't think any of these online opportunities, especially where you're getting sort of the experience you guys had at the Gunner program to really learn more about what client projects really look like and stuff like that is all about. So even more experience for you as you dive into your roles even deeper where you're at, or if you're jumping right into the industry. So yeah, kudos to you all for really kind of going through this and getting the experience. It's fantastic to hear. Well, so usually when we get to the project section of the show, we'll typically dive into a single style frame or two with our guests, and talk about the creative decisions around it. But I'd love to use this time to highlight your guys' final project that you worked on together, and get a little behind the scenes look at what someone could expect if they were to join the Gunner program. So actually, Yhareli, could you start things off for us and tell us a little bit about the brief behind your project and where your group's idea came from?
Yes, absolutely. So for this final project, the brief was to tell a story, and we obviously went through the brainstorm phase, trying to figure out what is it that we wanted to communicate. And one idea that kept coming up was this theme of being overstimulated, feeling overwhelmed with so many things coming at us, whether it's through our phone or just simply having so many responsibilities. So we wanted to capture that, obviously in a visual way through animation. So kind of showing this contrast of what it looks like to feel this constant pressure of having to stay plugged in, having constant reminders and notifications, but then intentionally choosing to step away, find some quiet time, and just unplugging. So that was our hope. That was the story we wanted to tell. And, as you saw, the progression of how do we visualize that? How do we create intentional moments in the piece to communicate those ideas?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's beautifully done. Amy was so kind to kind of share, your final project presentation in the video with me, prior to, jumping on the call with everyone today. And, I mean, yes, talk about very current things that are happening. I think that we've definitely entered in a stage of the digital era where everyone's sort of just we have these things attached to our hips constantly, and they're great, but there's a little bit of a vice aspect to it too, right? So, it was just, the concept of it was really cool. And I was just, and you really feel the emotion of it. You keep saying intention the best thing that you could possibly do with the project is inject all of the intention into it. So I loved the concept and everything you guys put behind it. When you guys were, Matthew, when you guys were sort of figuring out what story you wanted to hone in on, like other than sort of like, the constant pinging of notifications and kind of like the, sort of anxiety maybe that comes with that. Were there other stories or ideas you guys were exploring too, or are you really sort of sold on this from the get-go?
I remember the early meetings that we had, we were sort of tossing some other ideas back and forth. And another idea was to do sort of a visual piece to represent the seasons, which was another idea that we liked. There was another idea to sort of personify sort of like a natural phenomenon, like a shooting comet or something, or like the aurora borealis, like something sort of visually engaging in that sense. I think the reason why we chose this idea was because we were thinking back to the original brief, which was to tell a story. And this felt like something that we could all relate to and that a larger audience could really relate to. And so we wanted to say something more with our piece. And I think that's why we ended up going in this direction, because it felt like we could combine our skill sets together to really communicate this in a unique visual way. So that was getting us excited from an early
That's
point.
great. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and Jeff and Amy, I know you're kind of like overseeing the students when they're working on these pieces, but are you guys involved anywhere in this sort of process as they're starting out with the briefs and, sort of cultivating the stories that they want to tell?
Yeah, every single story that they're pitching, it needs to be pitched to us and we need to approve it. So we are taking a look at, what are these ideas that the students are having and helping them pick the strongest idea. And then, giving them tips on how to further develop that as they get into that initial first phase of development. So really, like the brief itself, we tell them you have 1 day to figure out what your pitch is. It used to be shorter when we were in person. I think it was only a couple hours, but with everybody being in different time zones and having people who are remote, we added that additional time. So you have a day to come up with what is this idea that you want to propose, and you need to tell us about it. And it's just a written idea. There's no visual development at this point either that we're looking for. We just want to know what is the story you're telling.
Sure. Yeah. Well, no, pressure's on. 1 day. My gosh. I don't know. Talk about a real world scenario. I know that's happened because I've experienced it myself.
Yeah. And they only have 3 weeks in total to complete this entire project. So,
that's right.
It's a limited amount of time that we have just overall for the whole thing.
Yeah. Actually, Amy, if you could share just a little bit, just so our audience is kind of aware, you have 3 weeks to get this whole project done. Like, how much time is given to sort of each part of, I guess, this like final project, like each phase of it?
So we have the students map their own timeline for themselves. That's part of the experience, is kind of knowing your abilities and knowing how long you can take on each part. Now, we do give guidance on that. We give suggestions. I believe we suggest about a week to maybe a week and a few days for previs, and then start animating. You get your animatic built out. We want you to start filling that in with final animation so you can see things coming together. We have mentors that are checking in once a week with everybody, like Jeffrey, and they're giving that feedback to the students as they're progressing. So we want to see regular updates from everybody as their project is going along. And, I'll be like, hey, you're taking a little too long on whatever part, like you're behind, because sometimes people need that little bit of extra push there. And guidance on like how long is too long on something. Do you really want to be there rushing the animation phase? Is this piece looking a little too long? Do you have stuff in here that we could cut out to make it a stronger story in a shorter amount of time so you can meet that deadline?
Sure. No, yeah. Those are all great points. I mean, yeah, Jeff, kind of going off of what, Amy just said, as being in a mentor role, like how involved do you find yourself to be when the students are really kind of like kicking off like sort of the story phase, if you will?
As far as like diving into like the involvement, I mean, you can ask Yhareli. I'm pretty involved deeply into their their previs, and trying to kind of educate them on something that I learned when I was in SCAD was the design for motion process from Austin Shaw is something that I try to teach the students on the regular. So like the mind mapping, the word list, all that previous stuff that really, in the studio setting, you might not have enough time for, but as a student, you practice this process and you start to develop this idea from a small little kernel to something bigger. And, part of the role as mentor is to help push that along, whether it's to say, hey, this little thing that you have here is a really great idea, or even, in the storyboard setting, it's like, how important are the storyboards here? And how important are the transitions in those early phases, and having the students really hone in on those things early on to make sure that, when they get to that development phase, whether it's the boards, the style frames, the development of the color boards, once all that other stuff is locked in, it's more of an easy, smooth selling in terms of the style frames, the boards. So, early on, we're, as mentors, we're diving in and saying, hey, this style frame, this transition really doesn't make sense, or, maybe you could rework this a little bit in this section of the storyboards, and really locking in those storyboards early on. So that, and I'm encouraging the students to think like this is a client project most of the time, because the pressure's on, so that when they get in these settings, in studios, they're thinking like, okay, I got to get these storyboards. And if I were to pitch them to an actual client, what would they think? And having them like do like, a script underneath the storyboards and saying, okay, does this make sense from a flow standpoint? So really involved, a lot of the mentors are in there digging into those files, checking in weekly or daily. I encourage the students to post in the dailies and saying, hey, check this out. What do you think? Or even check out this animatic. So the students are really involved too. A lot of the students are posting dailies. They're posting, hey, what do you think? And so, it's a really involved process back and forth.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I mean, yeah, I think we can all attest from our own, sort of working experience yet how important it is to really make sure you get the story correct, because everything is like just totally based off of the story. And if, one aspect of the story is not together and you're, the client's asking, well, where did this element come from? And you can't back it up. You're sort of like, shoot, well, you could say it looked cool. I mean, I think that genuinely things look cool sometimes. So, there's always a default for that. But no, I mean, you guys are so right. Nailing the story first and foremost, it's the foundation. It's like a house, it sets the foundation that you then build up off of. So, yeah, really great to hear how you guys are sort of approaching that from the get-go with sort of the final project, at least. Doyoung, question for you. I was looking through the presentation that you guys put together for this, and you guys at the very beginning of it sort of call out the the story you wanted to tell, like Yhareli had mentioned. How much of the story structure, now that since people have started to talk a little bit about the visual development, how much did the story structure sort of help with planning out your visuals?
Yhareli is really expert about the UX and UI, and Matthew is really expert in the character animation. So we part of the separate things. So, and I want to everyone feels satisfying that this final project. So we separate every part, and I'm focused on the make a organize the story, like the storyboard about the everyone's talents, the include in their stories. So, and we focus on the color scripts for part of the Matthew, and I want to support everything. I make the background image or the 3D guideline for the cell animation, and Yhareli is focused on the notification design. So I want to make more the background for the similar familiar things. So, yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. No, well, Matthew,
Is it work? Sorry.
No, that was beautifully said. No, you're helping me move the conversation along. It was actually going to lead into another question I had following up on that. Matthew, going off of what Doyoung said, how she was kind of sounds like she was kind of like being an architect in a way, kind of like helping build out, like what each of the sort of frames was going to look like and what scene was going to lead into the next. Sorry, we've got a barking dog in the background. But Matthew, like what design choices, based on what Doyoung said, were like the most intentional with like helping to build out sort of the environment and the scenes and like, building off of the color script that, Doyoung was saying that she had helped sort of create for you guys, were you focused more so on composition or lighting, color, texture? Just curious, like what elements you were really focused in on.
I think what we really wanted to capture was this contrast between the two worlds that we were developing throughout the story. So we wanted the character to first be in this digital world that grows in chaos to this sort of point of, I just can't look at this anymore. It's like so overstimulating, all of the different flashing colors and notifications. So that's sort of act one, where our character sort of reaches their limit. And so we wanted to first design that world and then figure out what the opposite of that world would look like. So the sort of final scene is this very like green and soft yellows and blues, sort of like a peaceful oasis. And in between is this sort of like dark transitional period when the character is sort of sinking below the surface. So I think our biggest design challenge was, how do we build these two worlds so that they feel super distinct, but the film still feels cohesive as one collective unit? And then the second challenge to that was, how does our character move through both of those worlds and feel like they belong in some way in both environments, but that they truly belong in the peaceful world? So that was always sort of the conversation of, what colors make sense in this scene so that the character feels out of place? What colors make sense here so that the character feels at home in this environment? And so we played with the character design a little bit too, actually like inverting the character during the point where they're sort of sinking below the surface, as a way to sort of push that visual metaphor, as well as of them losing their self. And when they finally find their home in this sort of peaceful, calm world, they're like super cohesive in that environment. So little visual tricks in that way to push the story forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I love that you keep saying, like how's the character going to feel in this scene, and how is the character going to feel in this other scene? And I don't know if this was intentional, with you guys at all, but whatever the character was feeling, as I was watching it, I could feel it sort of like myself. I was indirectly sort of experiencing what the character was feeling. Like, just as for instance, I just, one of the things I really loved was how much the character blended into sort of that calm world that you contrasted from the beginning of the video, right? How there isn't much contrast that distinguishes him from the background. He just kind of feels like he's kind of like pulled into that world. He's like immersed, totally in the moment, calm, not thinking about anything else, and nothing's a distraction. And you can feel that. You're just like, yeah, you can pick them out ever so slightly for us. So I thought that was a really great thing that you guys did with that section of the video. You could feel that. And I thought that was great. I also loved sort of the sound design work that you guys did with the piece. Yhareli, even this early on in the project, when you're building out the character, the worlds, the color scripts, and so on and so forth, were you thinking about sound design at this point? Was it sort of helping you mold some of the visuals you might develop? Just, curious if that played a role at all.
Yeah, it's a great question, because we knew sound design was going to make a difference in the video, but we wanted to make sure we could complete the video on time. So we kind of left it towards the end. And I'm actually glad we did, because initially we did have a soundtrack, which would help with the pacing. But right at the end, I was like, let me just take some time to really think through those small elements, how the notification sounds, how the going into the abyss and then stepping into the peaceful world. It was actually a suggestion by Matthew, like, what if we just cut off the music right when they enter this peaceful environment, so we can, again, not just visually show the contrast, but also with the audio. So it came towards the end mostly, even though we were somewhat thinking about it initially, like, we know it can make a difference. We just weren't quite sure what that would look like until we got to the end of the piece and eventually started adding in elements. And I'm not a pro sound designer, but I think it did make a difference, pulling it all together towards the
Oh,
end.
absolutely. And no, hey, I mean, what you're describing is also just like we all understand with our own client projects, like on the spot thinking that sort of like if we don't really have time to kind of like figure out sort of like a giant, magnificent soundscape, let's get the story figured out and then we'll pull those elements in at the end, right? You got to do what you got to do when time's of the essence. So totally, I couldn't agree more with that. Well, I also wanted to sort of talk about some of the tools you guys were using too, because, you've shared some really awesome behind the scenes stuff. I was kind of curious if there was a 3D element to this, with like a little bit of trickery and, with some of the stuff that materials you guys shared, you can totally see that. So Doyoung, I was just, curious to hear from you, what tools were you guys using to kind of bring this project to life? What were some of your workflows and processes looking like as well?
Oh, actually, we based on the 2D graphic about the After Effects or the cell animation program, but we want to show more dynamic things. So I'm using the Cinema. Do you know that one?
Cinema 4D?
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
using that one. So I'm adding that program. So it looks like a 2D graphic, but we using the 3D. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I saw that like you were kind of doing some like onion skinning with like some cell stuff in there too. Were you working on the cell? Was somebody else working on some cell work in the project?
Oh, me? I'm not working in the cell animation. It's
Oh, okay.
part that is.
Oh, okay. Oh, Matt, so you're the cell animator.
Yeah, I ended up taking the cell animation portion, and then Doyoung would sort of composite that into After Effects, sort of passing files back and forth together. That was our workflow for a lot of the cell portion.
Very neat, very neat.
Yeah.
So it kind of sounds like the standard Cinema 4D, After Effects, Photoshop, Illustrator. What kind of the tools you guys were all using to pull it together? Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
Well, when it came to like sort of the design elements, I'm not sure. It sounded like maybe Yhareli and Matthew, you guys were kind of like working on the design elements, or correct me if I'm wrong.
It was a group effort.
Okay.
Given my skill set, I was focusing more on the initial part of the introduction, where the background element, the notification elements, and then Doyoung and Matthew were focused more on the second and third act. Although, as Doyoung pointed out, she was the one kind of making it all look cohesive. But
Right.
yeah, we try to all collaborate. I know typically sometimes we split up work based on skill sets, but at least for the previs and storyboard and mood board, we wanted it to be as collaborative as possible.
Yeah. No, and I could see in sort of like each of the scenes, you guys have spoken about it a little bit, how, you had different color palettes for different environments and everything. But even in the sort of like chaotic, sort of like disruptive world, there was still a ton of color to it. It wasn't purely like dark, black, blue, purple, or whatever. There were like highlights of red, I was just curious, how'd you guys kind of come to that color palette for that world?
I remember, so early on, we each sort of took a stab at doing different like color keys and style frames for each section. So I think once we had set in that the peaceful world was going to be this more like soft green and blue, like calm oasis, it made sense to sort of intensify then sort of the chaos world, and the opposite of that being these like hot pinks and hot orange colors that felt really like overstimulating, and to get more contrast in there, throwing in some other like blues and greens. But there was this one incredible soft frame that Doyoung had made when the character falls down and there's this wave. I think we all got on that meeting and looked at that soft frame together like, this is just gorgeous. And we wanted to really do justice to that shot. And so that sort of became our North Star for the scenes that came before it, and how do we build up to this moment. But yeah, I think seeing the two worlds side by side really helped to inform one another.
Hey, that's a really cool way to kind of like sort of build out the story too. I mean, because I think we all know, yes, when you see a finished piece, it looks like it was just like created so linearly, and that couldn't be farther from the truth when you're really in deep with these projects. You could maybe even be focusing on the end, and that kind of informs some decisions at the beginning too. It's just, it can be kind of all over the place just based on like what the project's asking of you. So that's really cool to hear that one of the style frames was the North Star that kind of helped you guys build out the rest of the video on both ends. Very cool. I love that. I think that that's just awesome. Well, and we've been talking about the character a ton too. I was just curious, for anyone who was, sort of building out the character and character design, who, like what was the inspiration for the character, for his sort of like look and feel and movement and stuff like that?
I ended up doing the character design for the project. I'm trying to go back to what I was thinking when I made it. I think, again, being sort of influenced by like a simple graphic style, but obviously this is a journey that the character goes on. They go through a lot in 45 seconds. And so it needed to be a simple enough character that could also be expressive. And so I think that's what led us to giving the character this really big eye. And that just allowed us to communicate a lot of expressions really quickly, especially just also with so much happening in this film. It's helpful to sort of have okay, where should I be looking? So the character's eye line sort of allows the audience to follow the story a little bit easier as well. And then I think, again, thinking that this character needed to feel at home in the peaceful world, sort of relying on more organic round shapes, and softer green and yellow colors that just made the character feel at home in that world, made the character design sort of choose itself almost, I think, when we looked at different options.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I noticed in the video too, those like little minute details of like some of the notifications had very sharp edges. There were some rounded, edges to like even those elements, but very sharp edges. The world is kind of like very pixelated, sharp edge too. So I picked up on that as well. It's just like, yeah, this is a very intense, biting kind of world. And now we're in this very soft, flowy, like just very peaceful world. So yeah, it makes total sense why he would be much more appropriate in that other world versus the for the initial world.
Yeah.
Well, and Amy, you were talking about a little bit earlier, the time frame that they have for each of these sections. I mean, once the students are really getting into like, finishing up the design and animation, I mean, how long do they really have at this point in the project to kind of like get to the finish line?
It all depends on how well that previs and that foundational period goes. Some teams had to spend extra time working to get their concepts nailed down and really bring their story together and make it cohesive. So they might only have a week or a little over a week and a half to like animate, maybe like 10 days. Where other groups, kind of come together and they're able to get their story together a little quicker. So they might have a full 2 weeks to animate. So it just depends on how that process goes for them when they are actually in that formative stage. And I do weekly check-ins with all of the groups now. I have like times where they get to sign up and we just talk for 15, 20 minutes, whatever it takes to help sort out those stories and really find the areas where there needs to be more improvement. So it's not just, Jeffrey and our other team of amazing mentors helping them out. There's extra guidance that happens during this particular project just because it is so important to get everything right and to really tell that story and kind of just have something amazing to show at the end of this program that you just spent 12 weeks going through, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, so the program itself is 12 weeks and this final project is like a very condensed 3 weeks. I mean, it is very real world like though. I mean, I'm sure we've all worked on at least one client or commission project where you don't have a lot of time. So you really have to think about like, how am I going to break this down? And how, like you were saying, Matthew, with even like the character, like, what kind of character is going to work with this timeline? Like in a way, it kind of sounds like, and I'm sure it's true of every project, that even the timeline can influence some of your design and creative decisions. I mean, I think that's the natural state of being a creative problem solver, right? I mean, you got to roll with the punches from time to time.
Yeah, and that's very much built into the program is those deadlines, is those tight timelines, because that is so common in the motion design world. Clients have a vision and they have a deadline and you need to meet it and you need to figure out how to make things work to be able to meet that. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Jeff, I know you had said, and I don't know if this is true throughout the entire duration of the final project. But, once the students are in sort of this world where they're transitioning from pre-production to post-production, are you checking in with them daily for like feedback or, oversight or anything? Or at this point, are you just kind of like saying, like, hey, like, let's just check in as much as needed so that you can kind of get to the finish line?
Sure. I mean, depends on if it's a singular project versus a group project. But early on, I'm always encouraging the students to think about this from a client standpoint and a timeline standpoint, and putting together a Gantt chart. I don't know if I'm pretty sure Yhareli and the team did put together a timeline of sorts and who would be tackling what. But I do encourage the students to think about the projects from a Gantt chart standpoint, and think about like, okay, like who's going to tackle what we're going to do as a team. And then, through those check-ins through the weeks, we do have weekly check-ins as mentors. Say, the students will post on a Wednesday, or sometimes, they're like, hey, we are a little behind. Do you mind if we can, post on a Thursday or Friday? But I'm always there, to help the students and guide them, if they have a question. Sometimes we do live check-ins. I encourage the students to say, hey, can we jump on a call to talk through this? Because, sometimes things can get mixed between typing things out. And so, but we do use an awesome software to give feedback weekly. But sometimes, like I said, I do encourage the students to jump on a call to talk through some things. For example, one of the things that the students had asked on this particular project was, how do we make things cohesive from a color standpoint? And so one of the things that I encouraged them to think about was a color script, and kind of step them through like, hey, how do we make this whole thing cohesive? And so I remember that was a pivotal point that they had asked, like, to bring everything together. And then from there, but that's kind of how we, move through either the singular projects or the team projects.
Very cool. Yeah, going off of that a little bit, Yhareli, this question for you, but it sounds like you guys were not only being artists on the project, but you're also kind of being like project managers, directors to an extent too, and knowing that you all individually have your own strengths and, areas where maybe you really focus on, maybe one of you really focuses on design more so than animation or vice versa. How easy was it for you guys to sort of divvy up, I guess, all that was needed to get done and the various roles required for a project like this? Like, were two of you really like, we're both really strong designers? How did you sort of make these decisions to sort of figure out who was going to do what from beginning to end?
Yeah, I think initially it's always hard because nobody wants to step on anybody else's toes. So we're trying to be mindful of like, all right, who feels comfortable doing this or who's more interested doing this. So initially we all simply said, hey, these are my strengths. This is what I enjoy doing. But again, we all try to participate initially, at least developing the storyboard. But it just became apparent after a while that like Matthew, he's really interested in cell animation. He was really interested in creating the character, and Doyoung with the 3D, but even also the way that she was able to again make everything look cohesive as far as the colors. So that's kind of like every meeting we would have that discussion, just to make sure that everybody felt like they were contributing. But then we also had our own interest and strength, and it made it easier towards the end to kind of figure out like, all right, you can focus on this, I'll focus on this, and then we'll come together, maybe tweak. Doyoung and I went back and forth in the 3D. We had some ideas, but then she was like, "Hey, I thought of this, so let me show you how I think it could be best done." Or there would be another scene where I'm like, "Oh, maybe we can add some text, to the abyss and what that looks like." And of course, Matthew evolving the character and different things with the colors, like he mentioned. So it was pretty organic, but definitely a lot of conversations to kind of figure that out since we had such a short amount of time. And I had worked with Doyoung in a previous project at Gunner School, but it was my first time working with Matthew. So definitely it was going to take time to figure out like what our strengths were. But I'm glad we did, because I think we all felt really comfortable with the part that we took on.
Yeah, no, well, hey, Jeffrey has been calling out cohesion, throughout our chat today. And I think you guys pretty much nailed that, from start to finish, not only with just figuring out who was going to do what and whose strengths were best used in different areas of the project, but, it came together cohesively. And the one thing that I'd love to call out about this piece too is that, and maybe we could talk a little bit about it with regards to the animation, because I know we've talked a bit about the design aspects of the project, but you can really feel like the different worlds that the character lives in, and that transition in between the worlds. You were just saying, we added in some text in that dark world that, I feel stimulated, or, am I enough, stuff like that. What a great visual cue to for as a viewer to sort of pay attention even closer. I felt like when I was watching it, you could kind of feel sort of that pit in your chest where you're sort of just man, this feels heavy, and then you could even feel that even more when the character's really trying to punch through the door, and the resistance of whatever world it was in, if it was water or whatever, you could really feel the resistance, and then that punch through, and then a release, okay, I could take a breath. That came across so clearly with this project too. So, maybe let's talk a little animation for a second. Yhareli, Doyoung, how did you use animation to sort of intentionally get those feelings across?
I think emotion is very abstract thing, so we have a lot of options like color or animation, so textures and sounds. So I focus on the animation. So do you remember the open the door part? I think that part is the peak in the video. So we want to make more contrast and the big animation and dynamic things. So and very dark scene and the turn into white scene, and then add the many effect and the character animations, camera animations. So yeah, I think if we make the dynamic things, audience feel that it's very different emotions. So we want to express like that.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, no, there's a complete contrast. And I think, you could say a lot of different things about design and animation, and what really makes things stand out. Contrast, I think, is one of the biggest things, whether it's through the animation itself or the environment, the design, the colors. But, I think that's what, really helps with making a viewer like myself, really pay attention to certain elements. So no, you guys did an absolutely incredible job with that. Well, we've talked so much about this project in all different aspects of it. I think the question I have for you guys, Yhareli, Matthew, and Doyoung, collectively, what would you say was the biggest challenge and reward about working on this project?
The biggest reward and the main reason I wanted to join Gunner School is because of the whole community aspect. I don't typically get to work with other motion designers. I do work with a lot of brand designers, but specifically motion designers or illustrators, it's very limiting. So for me, being surrounded by two people that had different skill sets or similar skill sets, but just at a different level than mine, I just found myself thinking wow, the work is so much better because I was able to get feedback. I was able to not feel so restrained by my own skill sets. So I'm so glad that the piece would have never turned out this way had I been the only person working on it, right? So to me, that's just such a testament to yeah, working on a team, being able to bounce ideas back and forth, and also being pushed out of my own comfort zone. So I really appreciated that. I think the only challenge, I was the online person, and Matthew and Young were both in person. So I could tell that they were able to collaborate more. And it was kind of hard to be in that process initially because, I'm typically connecting with them in the evenings and kind of doing my own thing. But I think we found a good way to work around it. But yeah, that was probably the challenging piece, kind of initially figuring out what is our cadence? How do we work together in a way that makes sense for all of us? And yeah, kind of not being afraid to be hey, I really want to do this thing, or hey, I'm really committed to this idea. Can we give it a try, and not kind of shying away from stating our opinions?
Sure. No, those are, yeah, being pushed out of your comfort zone, very rewarding. We don't think it is at first, but it's very rewarding, no doubt. Yeah, no, and then the challenge of kind of being the only one who was online, that makes complete sense. There is a lot of communication and sort of checking in and sort of linking up, just coordination. It can be very challenging. Matthew, Doyoung, do you guys have anything that you'd like to say on what was it? Do you have the same challenges and rewards as Yhareli, or were there other aspects of the project that you found to be challenging or rewarding?
I think definitely in terms of reward, I completely agree, Yhareli. I think like this is definitely one of those pieces that when you watch it, I think you see each of us in it. And when you work on something like that and you get to see your own work, but then your group members' work really represented in like each frame of the final product, I think it feels so good. Like you just see the collaboration visually on screen. It's just really cool to see that come together. I think for me, working with two people who are much more experienced than I am in the industry, I just learned so much at every stage of the production, from seeing what they were doing with Cinema 4D and the 3D and how that was integrated into After Effects, to other compositing tricks that Doyoung was teaching me along the way. Like I've already been able to apply those things towards new projects. And I love learning that in a school environment, especially when you're learning those things from your peers and just lifting each other up and sharing so many skills. So that was definitely a huge reward for me that I'm super grateful to have taken away from Gunner School and also this project in particular. I think biggest challenge for me is like some like knowing when to like have an idea and be confident about that idea. Like I think in our sort of group meetings, like sometimes there's like hesitation on like making a commitment to an idea and like really standing by that decision because you want everybody to sort of agree and be rallying behind the same idea and what they want out of the project. So it's like when to sort of take a stand and when to sort of take a step backward and figuring out what that dynamic looks like so that everybody feels like they're equally involved. But I think we were able to figure it out and I'm really happy with how it turned out. So
Yeah, no doubt. I think every project that I work on, I think about, that's probably one of the greater challenges too, is just making sure that, how am I contributing? Is it enough? Is everybody kind of like getting their chance to kind of like help solve this problem collectively? Very fair point. No, that's such a great thing to point out. Doyoung, anything to add? Do you agree, or did you have similar challenges that you experienced in rewards from the project, or everything, or is it a little different for you?
I'm agree everything, but my biggest challenge is communication using English. But it's very fortunately my team member is really kind and patient. So I think I'm really happy to join this team. So and then is another big challenge is finding the common ground. So everyone is students, so we want to make the best things for this program. So we always conversations find the common ground, the same goals. So yeah, that one is hard, but I think it's solved.
Yeah, no, beautifully said. And again, echoes a lot of, I think, what we all experience in the real world with client projects in general too. It's, it's communication, who's doing, sort of coordinating on who's going to do what, making sure everybody kind of like has what they need, feels comfortable doing what they're doing, checking in. Yeah, just such a great experience doing this project. I'm fascinated at the fact that you guys had 3 weeks to get it done, and that it communicated such a meaningful sort of message with it. I mean, like you guys couldn't have knocked it out of the park further. So kudos to you all. Well, and this might, kind of be like a similar question, but I always want to ask it anyway. Usually at the end of the show, I'll say to my guests, like, what about the style frame makes it your favorite? But because we're kind of like sort of talking about your final project, I guess the question I have for you all is, what was it about this story that made it feel like it was like the perfect fit for your final showcase?
I think it was the relatability aspect of it, kind of like what we mentioned at the beginning. We all feel that tension of wanting to stay connected, but also feeling overwhelmed. And then, yeah, even though we had other stories like Matt or other ideas for stories like Matthew had shared, this one felt like it just resonated because of where we're at right now. So to me, I'm glad we locked in because initially then it was like, all right, how do we actually visualize this? How do we actually make this be something that you can feel? So it's so great to hear you say that, Carolyn. Like you actually felt some of those emotions and you could connect with the piece because that's what we were going for. But yeah, that was the relatability piece that we really like felt drawn to, and why I was excited for it too.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Totally. I think I remember in that conversation as well, like it was one conversation that we had where we sort of settled on the idea while also sort of discussing our skill sets and how we wanted to contribute to the project and how we felt most comfortable doing so. And I think this idea also felt right because I think from an early point, we could also see how each of our skill sets would lend itself well to this project, which would sort of be able to communicate everything that we had learned in the weeks before as well. So it was sort of this perfect alignment of story and meshing of skill sets. And I think we were all confident that it would just come together.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's incredible. Doyoung, anything to add, or everything everyone else said was just like, yeah, sounds good to me?
Oh, sorry. I'm really agree everyone's ideas. So I think, in my opinion, empathy is really important for the video. So our topics of the simulation is really good to telling about the for the audience. And then our brief name is Tell a Story, right? So our story topic is really fit to that brief. So I really like that part. And so yeah, we coming here.
No, it was perfect. I mean, yeah, telling a story, telling a very appropriate and timely story. I mean, it's the perfect fit, So I'm so glad to hear that, it sounded like just everything came together so flawlessly, without, I mean, yeah, it looks that way. And when you're presenting it, it looks that way too. But, behind the scenes, you're just making these intentional decisions. And that's what makes something like this become so cohesive and beautiful. And that's why I think it really resonates. So, yeah, job well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, guys, I mean, it's been a pleasure to meet you all and take a look at your incredible work today. Thank you for taking the time to join me on the show and sharing this project with us. We'll be sure to share all of your information as well as the school's information and links to some of the resources we mentioned with our audience to check out. But that wraps it up for today, everyone. Feel free to email us at styleframesatpod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think of the show. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, if you like what you see and hear here, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and review the show on your favorite podcasting platforms as well. And lastly, come connect with us on social. We're on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you again, Amy, Jeff, Doyoung, Yhareli, and Matthew for joining us today. And we'll see you all in the next one.